All right, guys, this slideshow is over organic chemistry. Make sure you take your notes. Feel free to cut out stuff. You don't have to write everything word for word as long as you have all of the basic information there. All right, let's get started. All right, organic chemistry is the study of compounds containing carbon. All organic molecules contain carbon. In order to understand life processes, it's necessary to have an understanding of organic chemistry. This is because living organisms are made up of organic molecules and use organic molecules to function. The chief reason why carbon is so important to organic chemistry and life is due to its ability to form chemical bonds with 4 other atoms, including carbon atoms. This allows carbon to form a great variety of organic compounds. There are 4 basic organic compounds in the body: carbohydrates, lipids, which are fats, proteins, and nucleic acids. All right, so here's a table over the organic substances in the body. It gives you the 4 organic compounds: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids, which we're actually going to talk about later, not really at the end of this one, but you do need to know it. It gives you their elements and their building blocks. All right, so carbohydrates are what we're going to talk about first. The basic formula for all carbohydrates is CH2O. That should be a subscript for the 2. I'm sorry that it's not. All carbohydrates are sugars, okay, and all sugars follow this formula. It'll just change depending on the number of carbons. So glucose is C6H12O2. It still follows this formula. It just has 6 carbons instead of 1. The functions of carbohydrates are that they are our primary source of energy. They are responsible for protein sharing. The body will break down carbohydrates first, and therefore it'll prolong or prevent protein breakdown. In general, this is what we want. Some popular diets will eliminate or restrict carbohydrates, allowing the body to metabolize the fats for energy, and that's okay, as long as these diets are stopped once your goal weight or size has been reached and before your proteins break down, because you definitely need proteins. And then carbohydrates are also needed to metabolize fats. All right, the basic building blocks of carbohydrates are monosaccharides. And the most common ones that we deal with are glucose and fructose, which is fruit sugar. It's actually the sweetest of the monosaccharides. And galactose, which is formed when lactose breaks down, and then it changes into glucose in the liver. They all contain between 3 and 7 carbon atoms. Anytime you see "ose" at the end of a word, it means it's a sugar and it's a carbohydrate. So lactose, fructose, galactose, maltose, all of those are going to be carbohydrates. And it comes from the breakdown of a more complex sugar through hydrolysis. Hydrolysis is the enzymic breakdown of sugars in the process of water. So remember that universal solvent we talked about? That's what's going on here. It's water breaking down these sugars. All right, so conditions associated with glucose, we have normal glycemia, which is where most of us are. Means our blood sugar level is between 70 to 120 milligrams per deciliter. We have hypoglycemia, which is, that should say below normal levels. Sorry about that. And then hyperglycemia is above normal levels. So your hypoglycemics are going to show signs of like dizziness. They'll have tunnel vision. They'll be very weak. And this hypoglycemia can show us, can lead to or show us symptoms of diabetes mellitus, which is the blood sugar type of diabetes, pancreatic cancer, and then other issues that sometimes we don't even know what they are. All right, your next building block are disaccharides. It's when 2 monosaccharides form a covalent bond between them. There are 3 kinds of disaccharides, or at least that we really talk about. There's sucrose, which is a glucose plus a fructose, this is table sugar. This is what you put in your tea, what you put in your coffee, what you put in your Kool-Aid. There's maltose, which is a glucose and a glucose. Maltose is what's used to make malt milkshakes. And lactose is a fructose plus a galactose. Lactose is found in milk. remember. So some people have what's called a lactose intolerance. It means that they are missing the enzyme, which is lactase, that's going to break down that lactose. Lactose takes a very long time to digest in our body, which is good, but we don't want it to stay around too long. Okay, it's kind of like that aunt or uncle that you don't really like too terribly much. You like to see them, but you don't want them to stay too long. Okay, so that's lactose. There are groups, certain risk groups for lactose intolerance. African Americans, Hispanic Americans, American Indians, Asian Americans, and children born prematurely are all at risk of having this lactose intolerance. The onset of symptoms for lactose intolerance is between 30 minutes and 2 hours. They'll be nauseous, they'll cramp, they'll bloat, they'll have diarrhea. And that's kind of how we can gauge, okay, you're lactose intolerant. There's also a milk allergy, which commonly share symptoms, but they are not the same thing. All right, polysaccharides. When a monosaccharide molecule joins together with covalent bonds, we have polysaccharides. So remember, mono means one, di means two, poly means many. Glycogen is the polysaccharide containing hundreds of monosaccharide subunits, and this is our and animals' storage of glucose. Glycogen is a starch, and it takes glucose, it turns it into a starch, and that's how we store it when we have too much to burn. An important structural polysaccharide is cellulose. Cellulose is found in wood and in the cell walls of plants. So if you're wearing a cotton shirt, you're wearing cellulose. Okay? If you use spray starch or you get your clothes starched at the cleaners, that's cellulose. Cellulose is formed from a sugar, but we as humans cannot digest it. However, it is important to our diet. So in our diet, we call it fiber or roughage. Okay, you're eating those greens and those plants. Women typically need between about 20 grams a day. Men need about 30 grams a day. And if we don't have enough, you start to have excessive flatulence. You'll get upset stomachs, constipation. For people with hemorrhoids, they need more fiber because hemorrhoids come from straining when you go to the restroom. And so that fiber will help kind of give the stool some substance, and it helps you poop. So cellulose is very important for our diets as humans, and it's the main storage of glucose in plants. You can also find them in the shells of crustaceans as crabs and lobsters, and it's called chitin. All right, our next organic molecule are lipids. Lipids are fats. They contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They're essential for the structural components of your cells, especially the cell membrane. Remember from biology, that phospholipid layer that is formed from a lipid. Gram for gram, lipids actually provide twice as much energy as carbohydrates. And the three important ones in our body are triglycerides, phospholipids, and cholesterol. So not only do lipids do your cell membrane and they give you energy, they also cushion our organs, which is important, and they also provide us with some insulation. So this is why generally people that are more overweight and larger are warmer and get hotter easier because they have all those extra lipids in their bodies. All right, triglycerides are lipid molecules formed from the building blocks glycerol and 3 fatty acids. Triglycerides store a great deal of our energy in our body. When the covalent bonds between the atoms in a triglyceride molecule are broken, energy is released for life activities. So after your carbohydrates are burned, you'll start burning these triglycerides and this fat, and it will give you energy as well. All right, your phospholipid molecule is similar to a triglyceride, except that your third fatty acid chain is replaced by a phosphate group. The phosphate contains 1 phosphorus and 4 oxygens. The phosphate end of the molecule will dissolve in water and is said to be hydrophilic, and it means it likes water. The fatty acid end of the molecule repels water and is called hydrophobic, meaning it fears water. So when the phospholipid molecules are mixed with water, they form a stable bilayer structure with the phosphate heads facing the water, and the water-fearing side is facing each other. This phospholipid bilayer is the basic arrangement of our cell membrane. Cholesterol is our next group of lipids. It is an unusual type of lipid. It is made up of 4 rings of carbon atoms joined together by covalent bonds. Cholesterol is needed for the structure of the plasma membrane in cells. It is also used to manufacture a class of hormones called steroids. Many baseball and football players have been accused of using steroids to illegally increase their strength. Some people have a problem with too much cholesterol in their blood. High cholesterol and triglycerides in the blood are a major cause of heart disease. So there is good cholesterol and there is bad cholesterol. We want to make sure we're eating the good kind, but not too much of the bad kind. All right, the last group we're going to talk about, because we're going to leave nucleic acid for when we get to DNA, is proteins. Proteins are large, complex molecules composed of elements of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. The other elements found in proteins are in very small amounts. The main difference in proteins is that it has that nitrogen group. Your other organic molecules do not. So they are constructed of building blocks called amino acids, and down here you can see the amino acid and basically its basic structure. Proteins will make up hemoglobin and red blood cells. There's also various others that we'll talk about in a minute. So if you look down here, you have an amino group, you have a carboxyl group, and you have a hydrogen that kind of floats around too. Your R group is going to change, and that's what's going to tell you the difference in the amino acids. There are like 20 different amino acids, and it's that R group that changes. All right, so proteins carry out a wide variety of functions in the body. They are structural. They build our bones and our muscles. They toughen and waterproof our skin so that water will, while it does soak in a little bit, it does also roll off. They regulate body functions. They permit our muscles to contract. They transport oxygen and carbon dioxide through the body. They help fight infection. And there are special classes of proteins which are called enzymes. And these regulate our body and how our chemicals react in our body. All right, protein deficiency. Most of these are found in areas that lack proper nutrition. So some signs and symptoms of that is severe weight loss. Your skin will get dry and scaly because it doesn't have that toughen and waterproof layer. It's easier to get infections and harder to heal from them, and it also causes liver problems. All right, enzymes are that special group of proteins we talked about a second ago. Enzymes are referred to as catalysts, and remember, a catalyst is a substance that assists other chemical reactions to occur without being chemically changed itself. So in the example on the right, molecule A and molecule B are joined together to form molecule AB. The enzymes are needed to permit every chemical reaction in the body to occur. So most important characteristic of enzyme molecule is its shape. The shape of the enzyme molecule must fit the shape of the specific molecules the enzyme works with, like a lock and key. Okay, so certain enzymes only process certain molecules so that they can do a specific function. So a basic enzyme reaction has to have the following components. The substrate, which is the material that the enzyme will act upon. The enzyme, which is the catalyst that allows the reaction to occur. And the product, which is what is produced with the enzyme and the substrate. So an example of this action would be the reaction produced when the enzyme catalase is exposed to hydrogen peroxide. So hydrogen peroxide with the catalase becomes water and oxygen. Catalase is found in animal tissues. This reaction is commonly seen when peroxide is applied to an open wound, and the release of oxygen in the wound will kill the germs. So here are the enzyme characteristics. They're used to regulate the rate or speed of chemical reactions. All enzymes are proteins, but not all proteins are enzymes. So each chemical reaction in an organism requires its own specific enzyme. Each chemical that is worked on by the enzyme is called a substrate. Each enzyme is also called an organic catalyst. And the enzymes are never changed by their reaction, and they are reusable. That doesn't mean they won't eventually wear out, but you can use them several times before that happens. Each enzyme has a specific area for linking up with its own specific substrate. This is called the active site. It's the place where the enzyme and the substrate will attach. An enzyme and a substrate are a compatible link in the active site. Their shapes will fit together exactly like a lock and key or a puzzle piece. This forms an enzyme substrate complex where the enzyme will go to work and put together or take apart the substrate, whatever its job is. And the enzyme and the product separate. The enzyme is ready to work on another substrate. So here's an example, or a couple of examples. Two very common chemical reactions assisted by enzyme are dehydration synthesis and hydrolysis. When the subunits of carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins are being pulled together to form large molecules, water is removed by the reaction in an enzyme. This process is called dehydration synthesis. When the large organic compounds are being broken down into their subunits, the enzyme-controlled reaction adds water between the subunits, and this is called hydrolysis. This is the end of your notes. Make sure you bring them to class. We'll talk about them, and we'll do some labs with them next week. If you have any questions, write those down, and we can answer them in class. Have a great night.